Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Hockey Podcast. It's been a while since I've posted, but I'm ready to do a live stream and talk more about some of the initial viewings I've gotten of the 2026 NHL Draft. Uh, Very excited to come back on here and do a little bit more to talk about what we've seen so far in the first month and a half and change. I released some rankings a couple months ago of my initial rank for the 2026 NHL Draft. And tonight I'm going to go ahead and talk more about the various prospects that are in my top 32, some other guys that are just outside or guys that you're going to want to look out for, as well as touch on some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, who are the best goalies in the draft, who are the best defensemen in the draft. And towards the end, I'll do a big Q&A with everybody who comes in and answers questions, and any sort of questions you guys have on any of the 2026 draft eligibles or any draft prospect out there, regardless of the year. Do yourself a favor, leave a comment off to the side, and I'll gladly answer those at the end of the stream. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. We're going to go through, I'm going to talk about my top 32. Just a few initial things before I get into the actual rank itself. I really think the rushing class this year is incredible. There's probably going to be 25, 30 different guys that could be selected from Russia, which is really intriguing. And they come from all sorts of levels too. Some in the OHL, some in the Western Hockey League, some in the USHL, and even some from the MHL, VHL, and KHL as well. They're across the board, whether it's a goalie, defenseman, forward, there's a lot of really good prospects coming out of Russia. I'm very excited to see what they're going to be in the 2026 class. So that's a key takeaway that I have so far. A few other takeaways I've seen. The Swedish class this year has a lot of depth. Obviously, we're going to talk about a few of the high-end guys today, but there is a ton of different prospects that are probably going to be available in the third to fourth round as well that are going to be really intriguing people to watch going forward with the rest of the draft season, including a few overagers that I think could find their way into the late rounds of the 26 NHL Draft. Other than that, I think goaltending is a little bit weaker this year. There's a few guys I think that have shown themselves to be pretty capable goaltenders, but it's not as much depth as it was last year. I think future drafts are yet to be determined, but as far as 26 goes, I do think it's a bit of a weaker crop when it comes to goaltending. Going into the forward group, we'll get into that as we talk through the top 32 here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the NHL Central Scouting Watch List, but I will do a future video here and then probably in the next week or two, going over kind of the highs and lows of, where I think guys are rising, where are guys falling, and talking more about various prospects that are out there. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into my rank here. Let me share my screen real quick to show you my top 32. So let me go down here. So starting off at 32, we got Dylan Rossi. I kept him at the same rank from last year, or from a couple months ago. He's really played well to start the year. I think he's almost a point per game here for St. John's. He's done very well in terms of his, managing his game. Nothing has really changed from where I saw him in August. I think he's continued to bring the production that is necessary for a guy to be on the edge of the first, second round. Definitely one of the better QMJHL draft eligibles this year. I would put him probably in the top 3 or 4 in the class as of right now, with some guys that are going to be looking up going into the next part here. I actually have him as the 5th guy here ranked out of the QMJHL class this year. And I think the QMJHL class is a lot better than it was last year. I think there's some intriguing players that have come from all sorts of walks of life, and should be really interesting to see where his development goes and what he's able to do. But have yet to get a viewing of him this year, but I so far statistically he's proven to be a pretty solid candidate there at 32. Number 31 here, we got Leon Kolarek. Leon's had a really good adjustment period to the OHL. I did drop him a few spots just because I did think that there were some things that I was concerned about within his game in the brief moments I've seen him this season. He's really acclimated well in Peterborough. He's come in, and it's a really young roster in Peterborough, and Leon has come and, took charge here in the top 6 and gotten himself some power play time as well. A really good offensive mind, very creative player, somebody who I think has adjusted probably a little quicker to the OHL than I personally expected, but having the pro experience in the Alps Hockey League and then deciding to come over even after I posted the mock draft earlier this year. He's come to Peterborough and he's made himself, very well known out there in the prospect circles and allowing people to see the true player that will come out. And I think there's still a lot more untapped potential with him. He's somebody who's a really good playmaker. The shot could use a little bit of improvement, but he's able to score goals pretty effectively. He gets in tight and he's able to, crowd the net front and really make sure that he's taking advantage of situations as much as he can. And so with Leon Kolarek, you have a really intriguing prospect here and somebody who I have him on the fringe of the first round. Some people may value him more as a second round, maybe even a third round pick, depending on your risk propensity. But looking at his upside, I think the sky is certainly more for Leon Kolarek and somebody who I personally have a really, really hard time not putting in my first round. Going to 30 now, we got Vilho Vanhatalo. He was originally not in my top 32. He's kind of risen back into the first round discussion for me. He's a bigger frame guy, 6'4" and 194 pounds. He's played decently well for Tappara. I would like a little more scoring from him. I think his production hasn't met the overall game that I've seen from him in the past. A lot of people, he's played with a lot of high-end guys over the years too. He's a teammate of Simon Kadalichki, who a lot of people have in their first rounds, some of them even in their second rounds. But I think Vilho Vanhatalo, honestly, is better than Simon Kadalichki when I watch them in comparable settings. I think he's somebody who, his boots aren't the greatest. I think he could stand to get a little quicker, but he uses his frame very well. He utilizes space really nicely, good hands in tight. He's able to will himself to the front of the net. Defensively, I think he's actually got a pretty good understanding of stick lanes, really good at understanding gaps and monitoring when pucks are coming through in his general area. I think with Vilho, there's still some real development here. He would definitely be a project pick, which is why I have him a little bit later in the first round. But, he's somebody who I think GMs are going to love his size. I think he's got a good size skill skating ratio in his game. And there's still a lot of development here, and he's still pretty raw as a prospect. But, I think by the end of the year, if he continues the production he's at right now and continues to build his game, he might find himself some pro time in the Liga here not too shortly. Now we're going to go to 29 here. Blake Zielinski plays for Des Moines this year. Another guy who he had a really good Ivan Holenka tournament. He really came in and was one of the best players for the U.S. team during that tournament and has brought it over to Des Moines now and is played at a pretty good pace. He's somebody all gas, no motor. He just finds every opportunity to work as hard as he can to get towards pucks. Really good forechecker. Brings a lot of really good skill element as well. Coming into the USHL, last year, he really, really impressed for somebody who was a D-1 draft eligible player. So for those that don't know, D-1 means the year before your draft year, essentially. He was one of the better performing 08s. And, as far as Americans, Russians, whatever you want to say, I think he was somebody who I think really got on a lot of scouts' radars just due to, his tenacity, his willingness to get into the dirty areas, his willingness to score goals in really high octane environments and situations. And I think that's something that's going to really provide him a lot of opportunity to jump into this first round here. And I personally find him to be a really, really good player to watch. 28 here, we're going to go to a guy who kind of dropped on my list. I had him at 16 in my preseason rank. I have him at 28 now, and that's Chase Harrington. He's plays for the Spokane Chiefs, teammates with Matisse Preston and a few other high-end prospects as well. They've obviously developed a lot of players here out of Spokane, but, Chiefs, I think, has struggled a little bit to start the year. I think there's still, the ability for him to get himself higher in this first round, but I haven't been overly impressed in the little bit I've seen of him. Last year, I got more viewings on him, and then the year prior. So I got a couple years on him in terms of, various viewings in different teams. And, he's just somebody who's an incredibly effective player, good straight line skater, doesn't necessarily blow you away with his skating, but he definitely gets to where he needs to very effectively. And he's also got a great hockey IQ and a great brain for the game. He's able to really maintain Good overall strength as well. He's not the biggest guy in the world at 6 foot and 200 pounds, but he's definitely going to be somebody who's more than capable of handling, the junior circuit here as well as the pro circuit. I think he could stand to be a little more offensive. He struggled to put up points this year, and it maybe just be some slump he's going through right now. I would expect his production to tick up a little bit, but he's somebody who, you're really looking at the hands here with this kid. I think he's somebody who's a good playmaker, is able to find himself in a lot of offensive situations, and he's, able to really either set up a play very well, or he's able to really manage his overall game in ways that we haven't really seen from other prospects. And I think he's somebody who, every time I viewed him outside of the views I've had this year, which is only about 1 or 2, I think he could use a little more gumption in his game, a little more firepower. And, should he get that, I think he'll find himself a little bit higher in the ranks here. Another guy who's dropped for me is Victor Fedorov here. Playing for Chaika in the MHL, as well as got some VHL, and actually even got his first KHL game this year. Again, he's still a little bit smaller here at 5'10" and 176. I'm inclined to believe that's an old height and weight for him. I think he is a little bit bigger than what we've been stating. He's somebody who, to me, is a really intriguing player as well. He just hasn't really shown it, production-wise either. The skating is good, but not great for his size. I think that might hold him back a little bit. Really smart player, though. Knows how to get into the right situations, finds himself more often than not winning puck battles. He's able to really influence games at the junior level. He's still trying to find that a little bit in the VHL and the KHL level as well. Still a lot of work to be done on a prospect like this, but he was very highly touted, 18 to 24 months ago. Widely considered to be a pretty, unanimous first-round selection. And I still think there's first-round quality in this player. I just don't know that he's shown it this year. Will he have a drop similar to Ivan Ryabkin last year? I'm not sure, but he does look like he's trending that way, not necessarily due for the same reasons. Ivan Ryabkin obviously had some work ethic issues and different things before he came to North America and seemed to find his groove in Muskegon. But with Victor Fedorov, I think there's some more work to be done in terms of making himself really solidified here to potentially being a top 20 prospect. Is the skill there to be a top 20 prospect? Absolutely. But I need to see more from him in order to catapult him more up my ranks. 26 here, a guy who a lot of people are going to be looking at me saying I'm way too low on, is Chase Reed. Chase Reed is an absolute superstar in terms of his skating. I think he's a really good player, but I don't know the offensive ability to be there as publicly thought as the rest of the scouting world has him. There's reasons why he didn't really do so well at the USHL level to start. Then he went to the NA, found his groove a little bit, and then eventually made that huge jump from the North American Hockey League to the OHL, where he seemed to have really found his upside, really found his ability. A lot of people say he's a very elite skater. I would agree with that. I think he's a different type of skater than somebody who's just fast. I think he's kind of got that thoroughbred racehorse style of skating. Really is able to, have huge strides just due to having a longer, lankier frame. Really can cover a lot of space very quickly. Combining that with a really good stick that's able to get into passing lanes, break up plays, really manage his overall game there. And then, using his reach, he's able to shield pucks very nicely. He's got a good shot, good playmaker as well, really good at playing the point and finding passing lanes wherever he can on power plays. I just don't know that he's done it enough to where I can consider him an elite offensive talent. And that makes me kind of struggle with putting him in this, this top frame thing. Everybody's got him closer to the top 10, top 15. I don't know that I really see that as of right now, based on my current viewings, on top of the fact that, he's had some struggles, in a couple years before his draft year. Now he's coming into his draft year and done really well. Last year, obviously, late last year, he was a huge riser in regards to that. Nobody really had him in the first round before the back half of last year. But Chase is somebody who he's got the right mindset. Clearly somebody who worked very hard to get to where he is today. A great skater, He's got a lot of really positive attributes, which is why he should be ranked in the first round. I just don't know that I see the public consensus on Chase Reed that everybody else does. I need to see more from him personally before I feel comfortable ranking him higher. 25 here, another guy who I'm ranking a little bit lower than consensus, but a guy who should be in the first round here is Xavier Villanueva from the QMJHL. Plays for Blainville Brabant. I might have totally butchered that. I've never heard it actually said. So, he's another guy. He grew a little bit. He was about 5'9" last year, but really offensively gifted, over a point per game in the QMJHL. And this year he's come in and been closer to a point and a half per game guy. Really good offensive skill set. Where Chase Reed lacks in the offensive ability, I think Villanueva is a better offensive talent, which has me ranking him higher. But I have similar concerns with Villanueva as well. I don't know that he will be able to translate that offense as easily as he has in the junior in the QMJHL here. I really need to see him probably, if he's able to get into the World Juniors this year, I think that would be a really good litmus test for him. Seeing whether that offense really translates at those levels too. The QMJHL is an impressive league to go and do what he's done this year and managing, to be a really high-end scorer and probably one of the leading scorers that will be in the QMJHL for defensemen. But, I don't know that his defensive game is all that well-rounded. I don't know that he covers ground as nicely as he should, despite the fact that he's a pretty good skater. I think there's misalignments in terms of where his head's at and where his skating ability is. I don't know that he always, finds the right spot to be in defensively. I think there's a lot of work there to be done, and it's just a matter of, correcting that in his game. But if he's able to do that, I think that's going to be a really intriguing option for, Villanueva to have in terms of really improving his pro upside. 24 here, we got Philip Novak. This is a guy who I was really bullish on to start the year, and seems like my convictions were right. Really had some injury trouble last year. Never really found himself in a good groove, but eventually led himself to being, playing in the Czech under-17 league, to this year playing in the Czech under-20 league, and now actually earning himself some pro time in the Czech top league here, playing for Sparta Praha. This is a kid who's 6'1", 200 pounds. He's a little bit of a bigger frame, but his offensive ability is super untapped right now. I think he's already scoring at the pro level, already finding a lot of really good offense in his game. And that's terrific to see from Philip. I think he's somebody who a lot of people are going to be catching on to a little bit later in the draft here. I had him personally ranked right here. I think actually I had him at 24, and I've got him right at 24 right now. I think he will, it was probably a little higher on him than the majority of people were to start the year, but Philip Novak has really proven that he should be in this first round consideration. I think he is the top Czech player available right now, even over Adam Novotny, who I don't have ranked in my top 2 rounds. I think Philip Novak is somebody who's got a legit pro upside, somebody who will fit into the middle 6 in an NHL lineup, and has shown that he's very capable of producing offense. He just has to continue to develop in the way that I know he can. I think he's somebody who, he really shows great initiative out there on the ice. He's somebody who takes charge, not afraid to produce his own offense, not afraid to go out there and muck it up in the corners. I think he just finds his opportunities anywhere he can. He's very opportunistic, and that's a major, major attribute to have as a young hockey player. And I think, he's unique in that regard compared to the class. And that's going to lead him to probably getting a first-round selection. Oliver Smirnieks, another guy who's incredibly mature in his game. I've had 4 or 5 viewings on this kid, and every single time I watch this kid, he is fantastic. Every detail is watched by him. Very good defensively, excellent face-off guy, great stick. Very good at getting on defensemen when they're in the offensive zone, getting takeaways, forcing passes to occur just from having, good positioning and good sticks. But in the offensive zone, he's able to still, play a pretty good net front presence. When he's got the puck, he's very good at, facilitating, watching, and scanning situations where he can find opportunistic plays. His shot's pretty impressive. I don't know that it's pro quality just yet, but at the junior level, it's more than a weapon. I think he's somebody who uses it as a strength as well. Played well in the QMJHL so far this year. I think I think St. John's is very lucky to have him. Obviously having Dylan Rossi as well, and some various other prospects. St. John's is looking, and obviously Alexis Joseph is another guy who's eligible in 2027. With Mernix, he's just such an incredibly unique player in this class. I know the concerns are, does the offense come at the pro level? He does score in very elementary ways, at least at the junior level. Every goal I've seen of him has been very, within 5-6 feet, but very opportunistic goals that, with the right IQ and the right mindset, I think it still translates in the pro game. But I do understand the concerns that people have with him. He's just not as dynamic as a lot of these other high-end elite prospects. But what you're getting with him is an incredibly responsible player, somebody who never misses a detail, always is. I've never seen him make a mistake in any game I've watched of his. He just is always in the right spot at all times. To be able to be 14 and play in the pro ranks like he did in Latvia, I think that speaks volumes in terms of his hockey IQ and the way he plays the game. I think he is super, super impressive. And he's one of my personal favorites, one of probably my pet prospects, if you will, that I really hope finds himself in the first round. He is so deserving of being in the first round. And at the very least, you're getting a kid who I think is, at a minimum at the NHL level, a really good checking line forward, with the ability to maybe step into your second line and do really well there as well. Another guy here that I had pretty high is Ilya Morozov. He's had an excellent start. I had him at 25 in my preseason rank. Now got him at 22. He's come into Miami of Ohio, and in a situation where myself included, was very skeptical of him being able to really acclimate to the NCAA level. He's done it in spades. He's done an incredibly good job of managing his game, becoming and managing his really high-end skill that he has, and finding a way to make himself effective at the NCAA level. Anthony Noreen and the Miami Redhawks really rely on this kid to be a very offensive and very important creator for their team. Obviously, he's proven it here with 7 points in 4 games so far. Probably being one of the more impactful U18 players that are playing in the NCAA right now, and that's including Verhoff and McKenna. A guy who I think is again, I was very early on him being a first-round candidate. I think with Ilya Morozov, you're getting a kid who is, I think, far and away probably one of the most raw prospects in this draft class, but he's also proven it at levels that his talent kind of dictates he shouldn't prove it at yet. I think he's 3 seasons, passed from, he was playing in like Russia U16, and then he's gone from that to the USHL to the NCAA in a matter of 2-3 years. It's been unbelievable to watch this kid grow and develop. Bigger frame kid at 6'3" and 200 pounds. Skating is pretty good. I think there still stands to be an extra step added into his game, but, it doesn't limit him clearly. One of the younger players in this class. Somebody who, again, I have a lot of time for with Ilya Morozov, and, he should find himself very early in the first round here. Going on to my next selection here, we got Axel Elofsson here. This is a guy who I think really broke out of the Holinka Gretzky and has just been on fire since. I was very tempted to put him in my top 20, but looking at his size at 5'10", I was a little reluctant. But he's proven it really well at the Swedish junior level right now, over 2 points per game at the U20 level, which is incredible for a defenseman. This is a kid who his four-way skating is unbelievable. He's great backwards, great side to side, great accelerator of the puck. He's even faster when he has the puck on his stick. Watching him manage the power play at the Holinka Gretzky, he looked like it was just the easiest thing in the world for him. Never misses an opportunity to be really impressive as well. Just really finds his game, and is just super, super mobile. Watching him defensively too, he's really good at managing gaps, always forcing people on the outside. Doesn't really play, a super physical game, but he's willing to use the body for somebody who's 5'10" and 180 pounds. Like, he just manages his game really well. Like, he just finds ways to make himself effective. And yes, it's at the junior level right now. Do I think he's going to get pro time this year? Probably not, because he shouldn't at his size right now. I think he's still got a lot to grow into. I said 180, but he's a $160 according to Elite Prospects. Clearly that's a skinny kid, but the upside's there, the skill is there. Great skating ability. I actually like him more than Villanueva personally. I mean, I've watched now a couple of viewings here of Elofsson, and I am wowed every time I watch this kid play. I think he's a super, super impactful player. I think he, will find himself to be similar to an Axel Sandin Pellikka. I think he's got that kind of game to him. He's actually more impressive to me than Sandin Pellikka was in his draft year. I think he's got that kind of upside to find himself really able to acclimate at any level he has, just because of his smarts, his intelligence, the way he processes defensively, the way he's able to manage the point on a power play or in the offensive zone. I think the sky's the limit with Axel Elofsson, and he is somebody who I think is going to rise up a lot of radars. Do I think he's going to get World Junior consideration? I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I wouldn't hate it. I think it would be really intriguing to watch him kind of grow and see where he's at. It's just that Sweden's got such a loaded D core. He's definitely going to be at the U18s and be a really effective player for them when in April when that time comes. But really like the game of Axel Elofsson. Definitely a guy you're going to want to watch for. I'm going to talk about 19 and 20 at the same time. They're kind of a duo already as it is. Yegor Shilov and Alexei Vlasov. Both 08s that are playing for Victoriaville. Both of them were just selected in the CHL import draft this past summer. And both of them are just dominating in the QMJHL right now. They're one of the most effective pairs that are out there in the OHL, regardless of birth year, or in the QMJHL. My mistake there. But for Victoriaville, they have led that offense, and they have been very effective. And they're 08s, they're in their draft year, but it's so impressive to watch these kids go and just manage themselves. Like, they're just so good at finding opportunities for one another. They've really shown their skill sets very nicely. If you can get them drafted together, that would be amazing. But both guys have very intriguing skill sets in their own right. I think Yegor Shilov is a guy who I think has more dynamic offensive ability than a Vlasov does, but Vlasov is still very dynamic and very impressive to watch. Shilov, again, a little bit more dangerous in the offensive zone, but they're both very similar prospects and both guys who have really acclimated very nicely to Victoriaville. I've only seen clips of these guys so far in the QMJHL, but my God, is it fun to watch those guys play. I think they're going to be intriguing players to watch going forward here. They've really shot up my ranks as well. I had them in the second round to start the year, and I couldn't resist putting these guys in my first round. Actually, Yegor Shilov was my thumbnail for the video, but both guys are incredibly talented. They're quickly risers for me, one of the best rising prospects I've seen so far. And I would be very shocked to not see them in the first round by the end of this draft class. I think they will find themselves and force themselves into this, probably even in the top 20 consideration, which is why I have them here. Going down to number 18, a guy who right now he's here, but I'm concerned a little bit about him, is Gleb Pugachev. You look at the frame. I look at him similarly to Oscar Hemming, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit here, actually the 17th pick. So maybe I'll just talk about them both at the same time. Gleb Pugachev is somebody who's a big player, great offensive instincts, really, really fun player to watch because he's always tenacious, always looking for the next opportunity, is relentless in his forecheck. But he's really kind of struggled here for Chaika in the NHL level. I don't know that he's done as much as I would like to see him do. It might just be the system, because obviously Fedorov has also struggled as well. I mean, they're as a team, they're doing okay. They're not amazing, but they're finding their opportunities and they're winning games. But I think you're looking at their situation. It's still a good development situation for them. This is a good hurdle for them both to have. But with Pugachev, I think there's such an intriguing skill set option here. I think, having a bigger frame, somebody who uses it quite well. There's a real power forward type with Pugachev. And he might be a guy who finds himself either sitting in this, or maybe he drops, a little bit lower for me. I did drop him a little bit. I think I had him at 15 in my preseason rank, or I had him at 17. So I dropped him one spot, but I am concerned a little bit here. I think there's some more untapped potential that hasn't really been realized to start the year. Maybe he's a little bit of a late bloomer in that regard, but I would be intrigued to see where Pugachev is going to be at here. He's gotten it a little bit better in the last 5 games. I just caught a game of his pretty recently that I thought was pretty good for him considering where he started the year. It should be fun to watch where he's able to find his game here, and I think there's a lot to like with Pugachev. He just has to continue to work hard, and the chances will come. With Oscar Hemming, he's, obviously his situation is pretty well known here. Originally was going to play for his Finnish junior team. Apparently signed a contract. His parents wanted to then get him out of the contract to go play for Kitchener after the Adam Valenti situation occurred, which led him to going to U of M and having a spot for him. Now it's put Oscar in a situation where he is not able to sign both in Finland and or in Canada. It's holding up his draft here. This is a kid who, fortunately, because of those circumstances, is going to probably find himself falling. And that's an unfortunate thing because this kid's a bona fide top 15 talent if he's given the opportunity. Currently exploring some BCHL options from the rumors. Does a Brook, maybe the Brooks Bandits step up here? Maybe somebody who there could be some other options here, but I think, that's kind of the leading candidate in my opinion in terms of they always find a way to get those guys. They're kind of like the BCHL London, if you will. But, with Oscar Hemming, he's a guy who is a really intriguing player. To me, still the top Finn in this class, no question. I think he's got some 30-goal upside. Obviously, his brother's got some NHL bloodlines, Emil Hemming, I believe for Dallas. I think he actually is a prospect. He's actually better than Emil was at the same age. I remember tracking Emil and watching him play. And, the clips I've seen of Oscar, he looks a little more agile. He looks a little bit more offensively inclined. I think his hands are a little bit better. The shot, I think, is probably leaning towards Emil because Emil's got an incredible shot. And he probably scores a little more than Oscar does currently. But with Oscar Hemming, there's a lot to like in his game. I think there's a lot of intrigue in terms of what he's able to do here in North America once he finds his game. And then when he finds his game, is he able to really translate more in either the BCHL level, the OHL level, if that finally gets solved, or wherever he goes. But he needs to play games, and that's really just what it comes down to right now for him. So nothing's really changed for me with him. He's kind of stayed in this spot. But if he does struggle coming to North America, that shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people that are observing, just because he's missed so much time to start the year as well. Oscar Holmets here at 16. He is a guy who, again, the Swedish class this year is super impressive. And there's a lot of guys like Oscar Holmets, just a lot of really good 200-foot guys, great offensive skills. Not necessarily elite in any quality, but very good in a lot of different things. And that's a really intriguing prospect for NHL, evaluators. With Holmers, he's now finding games in the SHL, playing for Linköping, finding his groove here. I have yet to see a game of his this year, but, the little bits I saw of him last year, I really liked his overall tenacity. I thought he was a good all-around player, not afraid to, jump into the defensive zone and really, get down low and really manage, defensive situations. He's a battler. He works incredibly hard. He's got a good skating stride. I think the speed is good. I think it could be better, but it's certainly not holding him back. He's clearly playing at the pro level. But with Oscar, just a really intriguing player. He always finds himself, getting some sort of production out of every game I'm watching him in. And he, I think he's going to struggle a little bit to get production at the pro level because he's got to round his game out. He's still a little bit too junior, in my opinion. But, he's obviously a young kid. He's only 17, 18 years old. So, if you're projecting him at 21, 22, I think Oscar's going to have a lot of this stuff figured out. He's a very well-rounded guy and an intriguing prospect to watch. Number 15 here, Nikita Klepov. What to say about this kid that hasn't already been said? He's had an really super impactful start at the OHL level, played at the USHL level with Oliver Zmerniks, was his teammate in Sioux City. Now playing in Saginaw with a pretty loaded team, and they've given him the keys to do whatever he really wants to do to be offensively productive. And with that, you get a kid who's a very good straight line skater, one of the better accelerators in this draft, good hands in tight. I think has one of the better shots in this draft. Clearly has shown it with production, one of the highest scorers in the OHL this year. Definitely leading a lot of draft eligibles and different statistics. But you're watching a kid who I think is really, really creative in the offensive zone. Rarely makes mistakes, always has got the puck, and when he's possessing it, he's either making a smart decision or he's just getting the puck off and in a scoring chance situation. Nikita is not afraid to do whatever he has to do to score. He's a little bit almost too reckless sometimes, but with that recklessness comes a lot of creativity that leads to a lot of high-end goals. So, as a coach, you're looking at that as a calculated risk, and Klepov, more than likely than not, especially at the junior level right now, he's finding ways to score. Does that translate to the National Hockey League? It probably could, but it's just, he needs to round out everything else in his game and really understand if that's a thing that can really translate. Is that something that can really help him become a really good 30, 40 goal scorer in the National Hockey League? That's obviously way too early to predict right now, but he's somebody who I think has that type of ability, that ability to go out and game break a situation, go out of his way to make a game his, own a power play if he has to. He's really, really intriguing to watch. And, he had a really good Holinka Gretzky tournament this year, was one of the better players for the U.S. squad. Was not afraid to get himself in different situations to score goals. And he's just a player's player. Everybody likes a player like him because he works hard. He's very diligent, and he seems like a guy who kind of just does it on the ice and doesn't really cause drama. And that's going to be really intriguing to a lot of evaluators. The biggest riser for me, Laver Gashilov here. I caught one game of Yekaterinburg's. I heard about this kid before I watched the game, but then I watched this game and I was like, I understand it. He's proven he's just a beast right now in the junior leagues in Russia. He's 23 points in 9 games or 22 points in 9 games. I forgot offhand how many points he has, but with Laver Gashilov, this is a kid who's really, really come into his own this year, and that's intriguing. I think he's, really good upside here, 6'2" and $170, still super raw, but to have that kind of production so quickly in the Russian junior under 20 leagues, that's intriguing stuff. And he might be a guy who finds himself as a high import draft pick in the CHL. I think a lot of teams would love to have him. I'm surprised actually that he didn't really get selected this year. I thought for sure that he would. But obviously, he didn't really have that huge of a radar this year. I think this past year, but now this year, he's clearly somebody who's going to get some severe looks here. I really like his overall game. I think he, should he decide he wants to come to North America, I think he's going to be probably picked top 5 in the CHL import draft, or somebody's going to take a first-round flyer on him just because he will come in and be a day one effective player. Should he decide to come to North America. But he brings a lot to his game. He's a very skilled player. I look at what he's been able to do so far at the junior level, and, nothing seems beneath him, or nothing seems like he can't do it right now at that level. And maybe that's a bad situation, but honestly for him, he didn't do that last year. And now he's doing that. So maybe he needs to learn how to dominate as a prospect and really find himself in that groove. I watch him, most of his goals are scored from, 12 to 15 feet with a really good wrist shot, or, he might bank in a rebound from a long distance situation, but he's finding his game quite nicely. And I was really wowed by him. I think he's somebody who, he's probably going to sit in this range. I don't know if he gets higher than this, but, he's maximized every opportunity he can in this draft year. And that's a big kudos to Laver Gashilov. Number 13 here, I got Marcus Nordmark. This is a kid who is incredibly, I think he's one of the highest skilled kids in this draft. The first time I watched this kid play, the first thing I thought of was teenage William Nylander. The concerns with William Nylander were not the greatest guy in terms of his effort defensively, but offensively, he gave you everything and then some. High-end skill, good shot, really good playmaker, could dominate a game if he had to, just game-breaking style talent. And that's what Marcus Nordmark has. Done it really well here at the U18 level last year, and then at the U20 level, he's had no issue this year either. I don't know if his game's mature enough to where he should be playing in the pro level. I think that's a little premature to have him here right now. I think there's some more that you have to watch and look at with Marcus Nordmark. Is, like I said, his effort level isn't always there. That's going to be a bugaboo for a lot of scouts. And, I have him highly ranked here at 13, but, if he continues to do that through the year, I think he might be a guy who finds himself in the late first round just because there's concerns about his defensive game. And those are well-founded. I think there's, a bit of immaturity still in his game, but you watch his game in his hands and how much he's able to weave around defenders and the offensive creativity and the skill. And then the innovation and thinking. Like, he makes some reads that are just EA-like. Like, you're making that read in NHL 26, but you're not making that read on a pro game. Out there playing against, high-end juniors and things like that. But Marcus Nordmark is so incredibly skilled that way. He can do that at that level. It's just an awesome thing to watch. And if you can unlock that continuously, but also have that great defensive game, Nordmark should really be in the top 10 in terms of pure skill, but you're concerned about the defensive game. Number 12 here, Elton Hermansson. Where your concerns are with Marcus Nordmark, those are very much eradicated with Elton Hermansson. Elton's the guy who is a really good puck mover, doesn't have the high-end skill that a guy like Nordmark has, but he's just a safer player overall. Very mistake-free player, good skater, really has a long stride. That's something I noticed a lot. I think he 6'1" and $181. He plays like he's bigger. To me, he looks like a 6'3" player out there, but that's just because of his long legs and his long, lanky frame. Heavy shot, one of the heavier shots in this class. Not afraid to use it either, which is great to see. Obviously, has landed him pretty good success at the Allsvenskan level for Modo. Brings a good offensive game as well. Doesn't necessarily bring the most punch to his game. I think he could stand to do that a little more, but I'm finding that he's a very effective player in just all situations. Really, kind of your stereotypical Swede, just always playing good hockey, whether it's offense, defense, on the power play, on the penalty kill. He just has such a well-rounded skill set. But he's clearly been a guy who's been very highly thought of in the 08 class for a couple years now. And Sweden really has relied on him to really do well in international tournaments, and he's proven it time and again. So with Elton Hermansson, you're getting a very safe pick here. I think he's a guy who I probably have higher than most just because of the safe quality of his game, but he will find himself in this first round, no question. Let me get a drink here real quick before I get into my next 11 here. Again, if you guys have any questions on draft eligibles, if you join late, feel free to leave them in the chat on the side. I'm going to get to some Q&A after the fact and talk more about some of these prospects and where I see them going. I think there's a lot of intrigue, a lot of good players that are in this draft that I'm even not going to talk about today. I'll probably talk about in later videos, but it's good to see the overall skill set and the potential that a lot of these guys have. So number 11 here, we're going to talk about Nicholas Arum Olsen. Norwegian-born player. You know me, and I love my non-traditional hockey prospects. This kid is so incredibly impressive. Similar to Monique's in terms of really mature game. Just brings it every single night. You watch him, he's an immediate force in every game he's in. Has never been afraid of jumping up levels like he has. He played in Norway's under-16 league a couple years ago, and now here he is getting some SHL time this year, which is crazy to think about. But he's that kind of offensive ability, and Orbro, he's done an incredible job even at the under-20 level last year. One of the highest scoring 08s at the U20 level last year, and close to a point per game. Always played really good offensively. but defensively and managing gaps, and even in a lot of situations that are very difficult for young prospects, he comes and he just manages it. He's just such a good operator of the puck. He's such a cerebral player that is well beyond his years IQ wise. He just, you run out of words to describe how incredibly impressive this kid is. But there's still a lot of runway here with this player, and I think he should be in a lot of people's top tens. Honestly, I put him a little more aggressively than most would. I had him at 23, and he shot up a lot for me. And I still don't feel like that's enough for Aron Molson, because I think he's got such an ability to play the game of hockey. He's, steadfast in his pursuit of the puck, isn't afraid to muck it up in the corners. A leadership, he's got a leadership quality to him that you just watch him and want to be effective around him. He kind of brings the energy out there as well, just always getting in the right situation, always managing any opportunity that he can. And it's really cool to see his game kind of develop and grow the way it has. I think he's somebody who I have a lot of time for, and I think he's going to be very highly thought of in a lot of circles. Tynan Lawrence here, I got him at 10, and that's no fault of Tynan Lawrence. That's just the depth of this class. Like, Tynan Lawrence last year would have been a top 5 pick, no question. Just because of the quality of player you got here. Still a little bit raw, but he was so impressive for Muskegon down the stretch, eventually leading Muskegon to a Clark Cup final and a championship. He was clearly a guy who was super, super highly sought after in Muskegon, and obviously his brought a legacy there that is going to be there through the club's history. But he, you watch him play, so high octane, such a great creator of the game offensively. Defensively, he's good. I think there's situations where I think he could grow, but that's every junior player. He doesn't do anything that concerns me. But I think he's so high end in his offensive creativity, really good, probably one of the more higher end skill guys in this draft. Has found a way to really continue to grow his game a lot. And he's clearly the cream of the crop in the USHL this year. I think he is the guy to watch in this draft class. And, I have him at 10 here. Is it fair to really have him at 10? I think he could be 6 or 7. It's just really dependent on how the rest of these guys fall, the dominoes around him right now. Currently, I have him at 10, but I wouldn't mind seeing him at 6 or 7. I think he ultimately could fit in that, that range. But there's just a lot to like with Tynan. He's just a super, super gifted player, and Muskegon's very lucky to have him. And I'm decently far from Muskegon, but I'm a lot closer to Muskegon than I am to a lot of different areas where these prospects are at. So hoping to get some live viewings of him before the end of the year would be really nice to see. But Tynan's a guy who I do have a lot of time for. I think he's a very, very intriguing player to watch. Number 9, the biggest shock I think so far in the draft cycle has been the adjustment that JP Hurlburt has had in his game. I put out a video. It was on my channel. I put it out in like September, I want to say. And my concern with JP Hurlburt was, is he going to find the offense he had when he played for the youth program in the Dallas, Texas Stars? And clearly he has in Kamloops. High-end offensive creator, probably the best offensive player in this draft outside of McKenna. I think he just has such a creativity in his game. His shot is super impressive. He's pulled a couple Michigans off in the past, always thinking offense all the time, but doesn't shy away from the defensive efforts either. I think there were times where he really struggled last year. And like I said, he started the year last year and really struggled to get any sort of offense. And then when he found it, he was a little bit better towards the latter half of the year. And then this year, he's exploded in Kamloops, leading the WHL in scoring right now with like 24 points in 10 games. I would expect JP to be a 90 to 95 points scorer in the Western Hockey League, and that's extremely conservatively right now. Does this play warrant World Juniors consideration? I think it does, actually. I think he's somebody who, he could find himself at the World Juniors, should they, hopefully there's not a USA hockey bias in terms of, you went to the Western League, so you didn't stay in the USHL. I'm really hoping that doesn't come into play with him. I think he's somebody who could be very effective for the U.S. at the World Junior level. And, I really hope that doesn't become a situation, because that will be very unfortunate for JP if that happens. He's definitely deserving, I think, so far, given the play he's had. But he's a kid with a great shot, accurate shot too. He finds corners, finds small holes in every situation he can to score goals, and that's really impressive to watch. He's somebody who, I think could even be more offensively creative than he already is, and that's saying a lot, because he's done a lot here in the Western Hockey League to start the year. He's just got to continue doing what he's doing. He's earned himself back into the top 10 in a lot of people's lists. I don't know that he's higher than this, though. I will say that, there's some limits to his upside just because of the player he is. I don't know that he's a top 4 or 5 guy in this draft class, but he's certainly going to find himself in the top 10, and that's kind of why I have him here at 9. Number 8 here, Ryan Rubrick. Ryan is a guy who I have a lot of mixed feelings on. I think he's a very intriguing skill set, good player. But I've said this before, and I really liken this kid to Johan Franzen. I think he just has some moments where he's spectacular and he's dominant and he's doing everything he can. He's got a great shot, good power forward frame. Everything's there. And there's games you don't see him. And it's not necessarily due to lack of engagement, because I don't think he's a lazy player by any means. I don't think he is at all. But there's just times where he doesn't involve himself in the game and he's not scoring. And that's kind of a concern I have of his. I don't know that I see top 5 quality out of him. I really don't. Like, I have concerns there. And I, whether or not those get fixed, that's up to Ryan. But I can't imagine I'm alone in thinking that. I think there's some people that, when he's on, he's tremendous as a hockey player. He's definitely top 3 upside if he's playing at his absolute best all the time with the effort and the effectiveness that he could have with that frame he has. But that really depends on what Ryan can bring to the table. And I think Ryan has got a great situation in Niagara. They're finding their game. He's been very important in terms of turning around that franchise. And, he's got other, supplements around him and Brady Wassilin and Kevin He and, some other young prospects that are there. And, he's just got to find a way to make sure that he's always being effective on the ice. If he can do that, I think he's going to find himself probably higher than where I have him right now at 8. Number 7, Ryan Lynn. Just an awesome player. Just unbelievably creative. Similar to Elofsson, I have a very high threshold in terms of managing his weaknesses, the very little that he has. Every once in a while, he's a little careless with the puck. That's every junior hockey player, but he's such a creative guy offensively, always putting up production, always making sure he's effective, getting a lot of power play production for Vancouver. Has had no issue adjusting to the Western Hockey League. He might even be a candidate next year. Should he play really well in the Western Hockey League this year and find himself out of development opportunities, he might play NCAA hockey next year. He's more than capable, in my opinion. I think he would be a very effective college hockey player should he decide to do that. But you're getting a kid here who, doesn't have a ton of power in his shot, but he's so effective at getting pucks towards the net. Just orchestrates a lot of offense and manages pucks through his game. And he's very good defensively as well. He's fun to watch. He's got a good amount of intrigue, a lot of potential as well. He just, has constantly provided offense for them and provided it in every situation, whether it's internationally in the Western Hockey League, playing in the CSSHL. Ryan has always been a super effective player. And, I just have a lot of time for Ryan. I think he brings a lot of great offensive creativity, but he doesn't cause a lot of mistakes either. He's a very mistake-free hockey player, and that's a really intriguing quality to Ryan, and I think that's why a lot of evaluators have him higher. Despite the fact that he's not the biggest guy in the world, he's not the most physical guy in the world, but just the offensive creativity and production he brings, along with being pretty good defensively despite the lack of physicality. That's what leads him to the high-end ranking that he gets. Number 6 here, we're going to go to Matisse Preston. Sorry. this is a guy who, again, really rose up the ranks for me as well. High-end offensive creator, best shot in the draft, no question there. Already pro-level shot. Um, consistently finding good opportunities with that shot too. Scores goals in bunches. When he's hot, watch out. Definitely a guy who takes over a game with a shot and a stick. Defensively, there's been some concerns that he wanes a little bit defensively. I don't know if I've seen that personally, but again, I've really only had maybe 5 or 6 viewings on Matisse Preston over the years. But the recent ones I've had of him, he's been super, super impressive. I think one of them was like a 4-point game. The other one was a 3-point game. But in both games, he was the best player on the ice. And that's just because of the fact he took over the game with, scoring goals from a long distance, ripping good wrist shots in places where you're not expecting it to happen, getting himself open in situations where he needs to. Just a fun guy to watch. And, the way he's scoring goals are goals that are going to be scored in the National Hockey League too. There's 40 goal upside with this kind of player. He just always finds an opportunity to get himself open. And when he does, he's just lethal at getting a good, accurate shot on net that blows by goalies. And that's a skill that, obviously the Cole Caulfields of the world have made it work. Ovi's made a career out of sitting at the point and ripping shots. Patrick Laine has really been effective at that as well. When he's, the effort level's there and his mentality is there as well. But a lot to like here with Matisse Preston. Number 5 here, we got Viggo Bjork. Sorry. He's a guy who, to me, he doesn't fall lower than this, in my opinion. Just such a high-end offensive, creative talent, breaking records at the U20 level in Sweden. Always finding a way to score goals or be effective in some way, shape, or form. Yes, a little bit of a smaller guy. Some people are ranking him far too low right now, and I think it's kind of insane to me, actually. This is a guy who, to me, is no way in heck under the top 10 in this draft just because of how incredibly effective he is in the offensive zone. So smart, so versatile, just really always finding a way to be effective and get production. Even doing it at the pro level right now, too, which is super awesome to watch. He's still finding his game a little bit more. Jared Gardens has got a hell of a prospect here. But it should be fun to watch his growth and his development here. Obviously, I think him and Nordmark, if they were to ever put those two in a line together in Jared Gardens before they come to the National Hockey League, that would be an absolutely lethal line to watch. But Bjork would be a big creator in that. I think he's somebody who, even defensively, I think he is able to translate defense to offense pretty decently and very effectively. And I've seen it on multiple occasions. I think he's somebody who, is not afraid to get, out there in situations, not afraid to be effective. Even at the pro level right now, he's not afraid of any situation. And that is a very, very appealing characteristic to have as a high-end prospect. Let me, one sec here. Number 4, again, lower than a lot of people have him, but not too much lower. Ivar Stenberg. Ivar has been dominant, probably one of the most dominant guys internationally in this class. Been 2 points a game at the World Junior A Championships, been over 2 points a game at the Helenka Gretzky Cup. In both tournaments was one of the best players for Sweden. Has come into the SHL now. Last year, actually had a pretty good SHL draft year in his D-1 year. And obviously in his draft year this year, he's far and away the best Swede right now. Him and Bjork are 1-2. And then the chasm isn't super deep, but it's deep enough to where I don't think these two are going to be supplanted from 1-2 for the Swedes, in my opinion. I think, Ivar is a very intriguing player as well. Great frame. A little bit more projectable to the National Hockey League than Viggo Bjork is. I think you see players like Stenberg more often than you see guys like Viggo Bjork. You have to be kind of the exception where Stenberg has to just be the average. With Stenberg, you get a really good 200-foot player. You get somebody who isn't going to wow you with his stick handling, but he's going to be very effective with the puck. He's going to make sure that the right pass happens. Also, very opportunistic with a shot. Accuracy with the shot is actually pretty good. Finding his pro habits very nicely. Actually, he's really acclimating a lot better than a lot of people would have expected. In the Swedish Hockey League, I think there's some real intrigue in terms of his overall characteristics in his game, really good at managing whatever situation he has to, and that's fun to watch. With Ivar, though, I don't know that, the three I have ahead of him have really special skills that are special even at the NHL level. And I don't see it with Ivar. I really don't. Not at least that quality. I see a lot of above average qualities that are going to lead to really good, effective, hockey at the National Hockey League level. But I don't see these elite qualities that you take chances on in the top three. And, that's kind of what led me here to put him at 4. With number 3 here, Ethan Belchetz. You don't see guys who are 6'6" and 230 pounds at 18 years old. And if you do see them, you don't see them with the offensive creativity and the skill and the skating that Ethan Belchetz has. This is a unicorn prospect that is, you can't miss on this kid. Like, he just, as long as the mentality is there and the work ethic is there, he's going to be a bona fide National Hockey League prospect. No questions asked. He will be a guy who plays in your first line. He might even be a guy who, I don't know if he'll play center, but I think he definitely could be a strong wing. Every highlight I see of him, I get more impressed by him. I've seen full games of his. He's dominated every level he's played at so far, even at the OHL level. Clearly a guy who has spurned into really effective offense. And, is that his body taking over games? Probably, but the IQ is really taking over games as well. It's not just a big frame kid who's dominant. Like, he is super dominant because of his mental game as well as the way he thinks the game, the way he's opportunistic in situations. He's a scout's dream. He will be a guy who is taken higher than the public consensus has him at right now. I had him at 2, actually, at one point. I had him over Verhoff. I watched Verhoff recently. I think Verhoff's actually a little bit even more high end, which is why I made the switch. But, Belchetz won't drop lower than 3 for me. He just won't. I think he will be in this either in 2 or 3. I don't know if he'll ever get 1. But Belchetz is a super, super impressive player to watch. He's clearly been a monster at the OHL level this year. Super effective in terms of really getting the offense and the creativity that he has to be a really effective player. And, just a lot to like with Ethan Belchetz. I think there's a ton of skill here. Keaton Verhoff now at 2. Obviously, I could talk about 2 and 1. I'll talk about them real briefly. You don't get guys who are 6'4", 220 pounds who have the physicality, the shot, the skating, the playmaking. He's a perfect prospect. One of the best defensive prospects we've seen in a very long time. Keaton will probably be a day 1 NHLer. Probably plays 1 year at North Dakota. And probably goes right into the National Hockey League. If Schaefer was able to do that and has done it as effectively as he has this year, there's no reason why Verhoff couldn't do the same thing. I think Verhoff's a better prospect than Schaefer was last year. I think Verhoff is a guy who has got very elite qualities in every situation, and every skill set that he has in his game. He's super, he's built in a lab to be an NHL hockey player, and that's what I have to say about Keaton Verhoff, basically. Sky's the limit for him. Definitely a bona fide number 1 defenseman for 15, 20 years in the National Hockey League. And then finally, Gavin McKenna. What is there to be said about Gavin McKenna that hasn't already been said? Really high-end offensive creator, great player, putting up production that is unbelievable. Bedard-like, McDavid-like, Tavares-like. He has the high-end creativity to be a really effective player. And yes, he struggled at the World Juniors last year, but look at what he did at the U18s, 28 points in 7 games a couple of years ago. Breaking records at every situation he's been at. Penn State right now, he's played pretty well, over a point per game at the NCAA level. for that to be a situation where people think he's struggling is insane to me. I mean, James Higgins was the guy who should have been picked top 3 last year, but because of these weird stigmas around the NCAA, people not being able to evaluate it correctly, we see these situations where these guys get underrated as a result of the hype they've already been built up. And Gavin is far and away the number one. He will not be supplanted. He shouldn't be supplanted. If he is, it's dumb scouting and dumb evaluation. This is a kid who will be a top 15 player within 3 years of being drafted. Like, this is a guy who will be a future of the game. You're looking at him like a Celebrini, a Demidov, a Michkov, a Bedard. He's in that class of prospect. Like, he will be a very, very intriguing player to watch. And anybody who says anything on the contrary, you have to question their evaluation skills, because he will be a dynamic force in the National Hockey League. And that I have no qualms about that whatsoever. Now we'll go into a little bit here. I'm going to do a kind of a brief overview of the Central Scouting watch list that just came out. I'll go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about this. I've already talked about a lot of the A prospects here, so I'll give some brief things. So just an overview for those that are new to this, but the Central Scouting watch list, they go through A, B, C, W, and limited viewing rankings. A denotes a first rounder, B rating is second and third, C is fourth and fifth round, and then the W rating is sixth or seventh, like a late round pick. Going into this here, some guys, Carson Corrales, I had him kind of as an A prospect to start the year. I think he's actually more so I think he fits more into the B tier personally. There's concerns I have in his offensive creativity. Has his moments where he's really good at the Western Hockey League level in terms of his offense, but really struggled here at the U18s this past year, struggled at the Ivan Holenka to be offensively creative as well. I don't know that he brings enough offensive creativity to be a top pairing defenseman in the National Hockey League, but he is a very good player nonetheless. I have him personally in my second round right now, which is why I think he should be a B grade, but it's really dependent on where his valuation goes and where he's able to develop as a prospect. Clearly, they think fairly highly of him at the Central Scouting ranks, but I would personally have him at B. Now, some other guys that I want to talk about briefly here that I haven't already talked about. Alessandro Diorio hasn't played a game for Sarnia at the OHL level, but he is an intriguing prospect to watch. I don't see an A grade from him personally. I think he is a guy who probably should fit in the B grade. He's going to probably struggle to start this year too, just because he didn't really have a great Ivan Holenka tournament this year either. I think he did struggle on that team, and last year didn't really put up a ton of offense, but this is a very intriguing player as well. I think there's a clear skill set there, there's a clear ability. He just doesn't really produce to a level where I think he should be an A prospect, in my opinion. Malte Gustafsson, again, I have my theories on this stuff, but I'm not a big believer in just being big and getting an A grade. Malte Gustafsson is a good player. He's a B quality prospect, no question. There's no reason to put him here at A other than the fact he's 6'4". Caleb Malhotra had a great start to the year. I have similar concerns that I have with other prospects in terms of he doesn't bring in enough offensively for me to consider him to be a high A grade. Adam Novotny, same thing. Another guy who's incredibly inconsistent. Don't know that he necessarily has that kind of game either. Brooks Rogowski, again, ranked here because he's a big kid, but should really be a B grade. 6'7" and 232 is a really intriguing package of, size and skill, and he's obviously brought production, but not enough, in my opinion, to warrant an A grade by Central Scouting. Luke Scherer, this is a kid who I think has kind of been ranked here on reputation. Production-wise has not proven it. Overall game-wise hasn't proven it. I would argue Scherer probably should be even a C grade. I think this is a way out there reach by Central Scouting. Daxon Rudolph, I think, is a guy who him and Pippa Reinen are two guys that I didn't really talk about a lot today, but both guys that I think could see themselves fitting into the first round for sure. Both have really good overall games, good intriguing, skills and things that really lead them to seem like guys that should be in the first round. So I kind of don't have an issue with them being an A grade. Albert Smeets, another kid who, I don't really agree with the late risers here. Albert Smeets was a nobody before last year. And just because he had a few games at the Finnish league level and has done decently well does not mean that he should be, being placed in A grades anywhere, in my opinion. He's, to me, a low B grade at the very best. Really don't see that at all. I think it's scouts overhyping guys just because they're big. What else is new? Chapter 8,900 about that. We got some B ranks here. Obviously, Viggo Bjork being here and Aram Olsen are two shocks. They both should be A grades, in my opinion. I could go down the list here more so, but I'm not going to – we can talk more about it in some future videos. I'm going to go ahead and probably stop here with the list. I'm going to do a future video on that in the coming weeks. But for those still watching, or if you're watching and recording, please do yourself a favor. Leave a comment down here. If I don't get to it today, I'll definitely talk about it at a future time here. Really appreciate those that have tuned in through the stream so far, and willing to answer any questions here off to the side. I see a few people have already put some stuff in the chat here, but willing to talk more about the 2026 prospects out there and your reactions also to the NHL Central scouting list. There's a lot of intriguing things that I didn't even talk about today that I'm willing to get into should it be asked. But I'll stay on here probably for another 10 minutes or so, kind of answer any questions that anybody or anything that, any remarks you guys want to have about the 26 draft or the NHL Central scouting list that came out. But I'm going to go ahead here and talk. Ryan just posted on here about, I'm assuming you're talking about Prince George here, Ryan. Prince George putting out amazing players. Yeah, Prince George has had a ton of really intriguing players over the last few years. It's fun to see that there's more players that are coming out of there, because I think, these community teams like, Prince George, Owen Sound, those type of, likenesses, I think, their teams are really part of their community, right? They're important pieces to that, that community and their group. And, obviously looking at their roster right now, I just pulled up their roster. Obviously Carson Krells is the guy who, is widely thought of as being a first round player. I think, other guys to watch here. I mean, obviously Tarek Parashak had the huge rise he did last year. He's, to me, a guy who should have been, very highly thought of, last year or 2 years ago when he was drafted. I had him actually in my top 15 for my rank. I think, some other players that are here, that we can talk a little bit more about that are decently intriguing, but it's fun to see that Prince George is putting on more talent. You talk here about Caden Lemire being a guy who should rise. I personally haven't really paid attention to Caden Lemire, so he's somebody who I probably need to get more views on. I believe you, Ryan. I just have not seen him personally. I've heard the name multiple times, just never really gotten a viewing of him personally. I'm inclined to think he should be C right now, just based on what I've seen production-wise, but you probably get more viewings on him than I did, so I kind of would vouch to you on that. Any other questions here, feel free to leave them on the side as well. Some other guys, I'm going to talk a little bit here about the goaltenders that are eligible this year as well. For me, the top goaltender that is eligible right now, and where I have him in my rank, I think I have him. Let me just double check here on my personal rank. I'm not going to post it here. I'm just going to tell you guys verbally. The one guy who I think is really, I have him here at 40. I think that's really aggressive for him, but I like this kid that much, is Denai Shaikov, playing for Gatineau in the QMJHL. A Russian goaltender, played in the MHL last year, was under 2 goals a game with a .920 save percentage. Again, this year, started out 8-1 for Gatineau. This is a kid who's incredibly quick in the net, great reflexes. I think he's rated as a C prospect, I want to say, out of the watch list. I think he's personally a B prospect, no question. There's a few other goalies that I think could be B prospects, but right now I think he's far and away the guy who is my top goaltender. Another guy who's done really well at the USHL level as well is Will Keane, playing for Muskegon. He's from not too far from me in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. He's played some high school hockey last year, found himself drafted here in the USHL, and has come into Muskegon and done really well. 4 games, I think he's 2 goals against, something like that, with a 905, 910 save percentage. Big frame kid though, 6'5", 200 pounds. I think he could be a C grade guy. I think he was listed as a limited viewing, I want to say. But an intriguing player as well. Somebody who I think I have a ton of time for, and could be a really intriguing guy to watch going into the rest of the year. See the views are dwindling here, so I'm going to go ahead and probably jump off here. But if you are new to the channel and you're watching this on recording, or you're watching any sort of thing on here, please do yourself a favor. Please subscribe to the channel. Please spread this out to your other prospect nerds that are out there. Really appreciate you guys being on here and really talking more about the prospects. I obviously want to engage more as much as I can. So Ryan, thank you for the comments on here. Others left some comments, but they weren't necessarily anything too crazy on here. So I have a few more that just jumped on. If you guys are willing to stay on, I am taking questions on the 2026 NHL Draft, as well as the NHL Central Scouting List, to get your guys' initial reactions. I'll talk a little bit more about some other guys to watch as well, some non-traditional guys. Another guy who's done really well for me is Beck Mackish, playing for Windsor. He's been incredibly impressive to watch. The only thing with him is his frame is slight and he's not very physical. That's going to be a big limitation for Beck Mackish. I think he, he's a Kazakhstani-born player. He's come over to North America a couple of years ago, playing for Boston Hockey Academy. Played there for a couple of years, went to the USHL last year, did really well there, and then decided to play in the OHL this year after being selected in the CHL import draft by Windsor. And now he's a point-per-game player. He's done really well to start the year. I think took advantage of the situation where a lot of these younger prospects were in NHL camps, and really produced a lot in terms of managing, and getting himself, some real production and some real points in his game. But I'll leave that here with the last one. So again, if you guys have any comments here, you want to leave them on the bottom of the video, please do so. I'll answer those probably at a later date here. I am going to try and get another stream done probably later next week, and talk a little bit more about this draft class. Maybe do kind of another Q&A session like this where we can talk more about various prospects that are out there. I can talk a little bit more about the viewings I've had on some guys already this year, and get more into why I have certain players slotted where I do. But I'm going to go ahead and end it here tonight. Really appreciate those that have been on the channel tonight. Appreciate those that comment. Please subscribe to our YouTube. Please subscribe to me on X. I've done a lot of tweets recently. I have put out a few shorts recently as well, so feel free to view those on the channel. And again, thank you so much for watching. Keep sharing. See you guys and gals.